Hello, BookTube. Throughout the month of October, I'm engaged in a couple of read-alongs that I couldn't be happier about. Read-alongs of two very different books that are nevertheless two books I really love. And one of them is Anthony Trollope's novel, The Way We Live Now, which I'm reading with booktuber Jordan Parsons. I'll leave a link to his video down below where he talks about our first 25 chapters. This book is very helpfully 100 chapters. So for our read-along, we're reading 25 chapters a week. And I was hoping, of course, that Jordan would love this, and his video makes it appear that he does not. I had praised this book ahead of time for instance, the warmth of the presence of Trollope's unnamed, unpersoned narrator. How in so many Trollope novels you feel that he is telling you the story, and he has a say, he has an opinion about what he's telling you. I mentioned in connection with this novel that that was so pleasant. Jordan didn't notice it, or didn't think it was all that effective. I mentioned that Trollope was very angry when he wrote this book, and it really brought a liveliness to his narrative flow. And Jordan called the narrative flat. And by the time he got in his video to saying that he was in the middle of these first 25 pages, and he kept thinking, well, I'd rather be reading Dickens, I thought, good Lord, I'd had enough, and I was going to respond to that kind of heresy the way I usually do, which is to mail the person who utters that heresy a live rat in the mail. But Jordan would welcome the creature with open arms, so that ruins the effect. I just have to hope in the next 25 chapters that he reads that he ends up liking it a lot more than he did the first 25 chapters. For myself, the liking is unbounded. I adore this novel, just adore it, even though Trollope's readers at the time and most of his critics did not. And at the beginning of these first 25 chapters, as Trollope puts it, we are introduced to Lady Carberry, who is the widow of a carping, horrible, abusive baronet who accepted his lifelong title, his hereditary title. His son is also a baronet, even though he didn't really have a whole lot in the way of money to hand down. Mrs. Carberry is destitute, almost, of money. She needs to hustle a lot, and she needs to put up with the impertinences and the sly looks of all of the tradesmen who all have outstanding bills from her. She has decided that the way that she will try to fix that herself is to write. She is a scribbler for money. And it looks pretty clear from what we can tell that Trollope originally intended this book to be about the evils and hypocrisies of the literary trade, his own world. He abandoned that idea, and I think probably that was wise, because you don't want to bite the hand that feeds you. But Lady Carberry also has two other methods for escaping lifelong penury, and they both involve her children. She has two children. Her boy, Felix, is the new baronet, now that the father is dead, and she also has a daughter. And she wants both of them to marry well. She wants her daughter to marry Roger Carberry, the head of the family. He's the oldest member of the oldest branch of the Carberry family. Lives next to the Carberry River. Lives in the Carberry house, which is an actual moated old mansion from the reign of Charles II. He has lovely grounds, lovely gardens, affectionate tenants. He's well known in the neighborhood. He doesn't have the biggest house. He doesn't have the most opulent grounds. But he's a rock-solid, decent 40-year-old English country squire. So the title didn't go to him. The title was awarded to Sir Felix's father, and it now devolves to Sir Felix, who is a baronet. But Lady Carberry has matrimonial plans for both of them. She wants her daughter to marry Roger Carberry, and he very much wants to marry her. He's in love with her, or thinks he is. Cousins marrying, not as big a deal to Victorians as it is to us, especially not the landed class. And even more so, much more so, Mrs. Carberry wants Felix to marry the greatest heiress in London, an heiress whose money will be limitless, it's presumed. The only daughter, the only child of Monsieur Melmotte, Augustus Melmotte, who is a financier, a speculative financier. He's a new arrival in London, but he is known to be fabulously wealthy, has a huge mansion in town, is covetous of huge mansions in the country. When he has a crush, a big party in London, hundreds of people show up, people fight for tickets. even though all of London, and especially the higher born members of society in London, know that he is not their kind of person. That he and his Madame Melmotte, who may or may not be his wife, Marie, his daughter, may or may not be his real daughter, they are appalling people, we are told. They are crass, money-oriented, common, uneducated, lowbrow, uninteresting. They just have money. That's the only thing that puts them prominent in society, is that they just have money. And because Melmotte knows that he has a large amount of money, he feels certain that he can have his way in finagling the best possible marriage for Ivanka. And that will entail a lord. And that's the whole goal here, is to get his daughter, who we're told is not particularly nice, not particularly bright. His goal is to get her married to British landed nobility. And for a little while, a tiny bit of time, he thinks that might be Sir Felix. But he has his eyes set on others, on full-blown lords, not a baronet, which is about as low down the pecking order as you can get, but an earl or a marquis or even a duke, something like that. And he thinks his money will make that happen. We're introduced to him as well. The setting shifts from Lady Carberry fairly quickly to the broader world of London, which is totally dominated by Melmotte. He attracts not only greedy people who want to speculate with him in order to make money and don't care how unethical it is, but also impoverished nobility that need him to pump up their finances, whether it's by giving them a little loan here and there, or in the case, as it develops in these first 25 chapters, of maybe buying one of their estates, alleviating their debt in some way or other. It allows Melmotte to exhibit familiarity with the nobility that they don't like at all. They would prefer to put him in his place, but they can't, because in this debased modern era that Trollope is satirizing, money rules everything. Money is more important than everything. Money is what allows people like Melmotte to get their way. Melmotte even has his eyes on Parliament. And these chapters commence in that way, and everything spins out from characters who are unhappy in love. That Trollope is often called, he was called by Henry James, the master of minutiae, the great writer of the real. But what he really excels at is people who are unhappy in love, which is why they turn up in almost every novel that he wrote. And it's also, I would argue, just personally, why his characters who are happy in love are so insufferably boring. You have a lot of people who are unhappy in love here. For instance, Roger Carberry, the head of the Carberry family, is unhappy because Mrs. Carberry's daughter she esteems him, but she does not love him. And she does love someone else, a man named Paul Montague, who has no money, and who has therefore been drawn into the distant orbit of Mr. Melmotte, and to that soiling world. Felix Carberry is a little bit too soulless to experience love of any kind. He certainly doesn't care about his mother or his sister. He doesn't care about Marie Melmotte, but he will condescend to court her for the money that she will bring him. And he also has a little girl on the side. He has a country girl on the side that he also doesn't care about. And Marie Melmotte, Melmotte's daughter, begins to become unhappy in love because she is revolted by the idea that her father presents her with of marrying one lord or another. She can't stand them, and they seem indifferent to her. And as she realizes that kind of revulsion, she becomes more and more aware of her own power. That she becomes more and more of a person, essentially, by rejecting these suitors. And eventually, disastrously, she comes to think that Felix Carberry loves her and gives her heart to him, intending to defy her father. But before she defies her father, she wants Felix to go to her father and ask about, affiancing to her, having her hand in marriage. There's a wonderful scene where Felix does exactly that. He finally screws up his courage to go and see Melmotte. And Melmotte asks him a ton of questions that he views as totally impertinent. Practical questions about what's your income? What kind of an income can you bring to this? It's a wonderful scene. Trollope excels at scenes like that, where Felix basically says, well, I wasn't really thinking of an income because it's assumed by everybody and their brother that whoever marries your daughter is going to get a huge fortune. I'm not going to have to worry. You're not going to have to worry about my income because you're going to give your daughter a huge fortune. And Mr. Melmotte sets him straight. Says, so I will probably settle money on her provided she marries the way I want. If she doesn't, she won't get a penny. And Melmotte immediately learns that Sir Felix is completely penniless, that he is a gambler, that he is not entitled in any legal way to Carbury House, to Roger Carbury, even though he is Roger Carbury's heir. He's not entitled to it in any way. It's not the property is not entailed. Roger Carbury, as one character says, could leave it to me tomorrow, and nothing would stop him. So it's not guaranteed at all. And Roger Carbury's 40 years old. He could live for another 40 years. He could have a wife and an heir, in which case Felix has nothing. Felix, at the moment that we see him, has gone through the little amount of money that he had at his father's death and is living off his mother and off gambling. And the gambling is disastrously haphazard, like everything else to do with this character. He's a member of the worst club in London, the Bear Garden, that only opens at 2 or 3 in the afternoon because its members are always going to be hungover. So the club's not even open in the morning. And it's basically a gambling den. A couple of seedy young lords, a couple of raffish young gentlemen and older gentlemen go there and gamble, and they've been doing it for so long that they're passing around worthless IOUs to each other and hardly ever forcing each other to collect. Felix Carbury would have quite a bit of money at his disposal if he would collect his IOUs, but he can't. And that habit at the Bear Garden becomes awkward when a visitor comes to London. Hamilton Fisker, a man comes from America, with a great deal that he wants to propose to Mr. Melmotte. A great railway that will be built between California and Veracruz, Mexico. And as we're told, Trollope right out tells us that Fisker doesn't care about the railway. He doesn't care whether it gets built or not. His skill is at coming up with highly colorful and persuasive brochures to convince people to invest in it. It is a scam. It's pretty obvious that there is never going to be a great railway. It's never going to exist. It is just a bubble. It's just a scam. But Melmotte is very good at those kinds of scams, and he immediately becomes president of the English board of the Great Railway, immediately starts raising all sorts of stock prospectuses, and the money starts flowing in, including from his other board members, one of whom is Felix, one of whom is Paul Montague, who don't even know how the whole thing is working. It's obviously a Ponzi scheme. And Melmotte knows that, but he is keeping everything very close to his breast for his other board members. Paul Montague actually threatens at one point, well, if I don't get satisfaction here, if you don't tell me how this all works, then I'll make it plain to the public that I'm on the board of this thing and I have no idea what's going on. That won't exactly help your shares. Hamilton Fisker makes a big splash in London. He goes to the Bear Garden to gamble, and he cleans all these young fops out. And very embarrassingly, they have to realize that they don't have any money. What's an IOU to him? He doesn't care. He was expecting that they were playing for money. It's a wonderful, embarrassing scene. There are a number of embarrassing scenes in here, including some that hold over from Trollope's original conception of this novel, which was a literary satire. What Trollope would have been like as a literary satirist. I don't think he could have done it. Sales on this novel were wobbly enough as it is. He could really not afford to mock the industry that he was trying to earn a living from. But a little holdover is the fate of Lady Carbury's first book, Criminal Queens. She describes it in the first chapter, and she's merely referring to it in letters that she writes to 3 literary editors in London. She wants them to review her book. She knows perfectly well, as one character tells her, that nothing is worse than indifference. Reviews are good even if they're bad. He tells her that, and she believes it, but it's very hard on her because she worked so hard to write her crappy book. And the genius of Trollope here is in those letters, she is loving her book. She's trying to coerce these editors into giving it a favorable review. And she doesn't really describe its particulars, but it's unavoidably obvious, even in the first chapter, that Criminal Queens is a terrible book. Just terrible. And the editors know that too. It's just a couple of them are sweet on her. Lady Carbury is still a very attractive woman. And a couple of them just know how this goes. She admittedly tells one of them, openly says, that she is commissioned to review his next book for another literary review. And she asks him, she says, well, if there are any points about your book that you'd especially like me to highlight, do feel free to tell me. She's basically offering to write a publicity release for his book, if he does the same for her book. That is ripe grounds for satire. That happens today. Uh, and and a couple of the editors comply. One of them is a little bit sterner than that and has the ultimate get out of jail free card for any literary section editor, which is to tell a complaining author, I gave your book to my reviewer. It's entirely up to them. I let them write the review. And this particular reviewer, I want to read you a section here. He gives the book to yes. I want to read you a little bit about what Trollope has to say about book reviewing. Just a little bit, if you'll indulge me, because I love this so much. During the last 6 weeks, Lady Carberry had lived a life of very mixed depression and elevation. Her great work had come out, The Criminal Queens, and had been very widely reviewed. In this matter, it had been by no means all pleasure, inasmuch as many very hard words had been said of her. In spite of the dear friendship between herself and Mr. Alf, and he's one of the literary editors, one of Mr. Alf's most sharp-nailed subordinates had set upon her book and had pulled it to pieces with almost rabid malignity. One would have thought that so slight a thing could hardly have been worthy of such protracted attention. Error after error was laid bare with merciless prolixity. No doubt the writer of the article must have had all history at his finger ends, as is pointing out various mistakes he made. He always spoke as if the historical facts which had been misquoted, misstated, or misrepresented as being familiar to all in their bearings from every schoolboy of 12 years old. The writer of the criticism never suggested the idea that he himself, having been fully provided with books of reference, and having learned the art of finding in them what he wanted at a moment's notice, had, as he went on with his work, checked off the blunders without any more permanent knowledge of his own than a housekeeper has of the coal she counts so many sacks into the cellar. He spoke of the parentage of one wicked ancient lady and the dates and frailties of another with an assurance intended to show that an exact knowledge of all these details abided with him always. He must have been a man of vast and varied erudition, and his name was Jones. Trollope goes on to say, there is the review intended to sell a book, which comes out immediately after the appearance of the book, or sometimes before it. The review which gives reputation, but does not affect the sale, and which comes out a little later, and the review which snuffs a book out quietly, the review which is to raise or lower the author a single peg or 2 pegs, as the case may be, the review which is suddenly to make an author, and the review which is to crush him. An exuberant Jones has been known before and now to declare aloud that he would crush a man, and a self-confident Jones has been known to declare that he had accomplished the deed. Of all reviews, the crushing review is the most popular, as being the most readable. When the rumor goes abroad that some notable man has been actually crushed, been positively driven by an entire juggernaut's car of criticism till his literary body be a mere amorphous mass, then a real success has been achieved, and the Alf of the day has done a great thing. But even the crushing of poor Lady Carberry, if it be absolute, is effective. And she's furious. She goes to a friendly editor of hers, just furious, and says that she can prove it all. She's got it all in black and white. And the editor says that this won't hurt the sale of the book. Don't worry about it. Certainly don't pick a fight with the newspaper. That won't work. That won't do anybody any good. It's a wonderful scene. It's one of the only ones. The literary side of things is largely dropped by Trollope as the novel goes on. Unfortunately, because he could have made it even more damning, Lady Carberry eventually decides, with a little nudging from her editor, to write a novel next. And it is a bit described, but I wish there were more of it, naturally, because it's my own world. I wish there were more of it. But instead, all that we get here is the wheelings and dealings of Melmotte. It becomes quickly obvious in the course of this book that although Melmotte has a little money to throw around, he is not rich. He is not a billionaire. And his taxes are not under audit. He's just lying. He's deceiving everyone about his total wealth. And he's deceiving each person separate from each other person, just resting on the fact that they will never compare notes, even though he's forever getting gossip like that on everybody else. And that is largely where these 25 chapters end. There's an excruciatingly uncomfortable country dinner party. There's a family here, the Longstaffs, who the head of the family is in dire need of money. And his son and heir, Adolphus, Dolly Longstaff, is one of those wastrel lords at the Bear Garden, and actually has a property entailed to himself alone that his father can't touch. And his father needs his son's permission to do anything financially with Mr. Melmotte involving that property or any other property. And he wants to alleviate, he wants to disembarrass, he wants to pay off the debts of his gigantic country estate. And he can't do it without his son's help. And his son won't give him any help. And the Longstaffs have a big party where Melmotte goes and everybody else goes, and it's just a gruesome affair. And you might be wondering, well, why doesn't Dolly Longstaff want to help his father when, as his father points out to him, you're helping yourself. You're going to inherit this property. Wouldn't you rather inherit it without all this debt attached to it? But the fact that Dolly Longstaff absolutely will not do that is part and parcel of why this book was such a bitter pill for critics of its own day to swallow. Because there's almost no good feeling anywhere in this book. There's almost no one that you can like. You can kind of sort of like Paul Montague, but he has done nothing but fall in with the wrong people. His cousin Roger is pretty much the only decent person that he knows. And cousin Roger is another person you might be able to like a little, but he's maudlin. Even Trollope refers to him as silly. He's a silly character. He's not, there's nothing anywhere in this book like Plantagenet Palliser, who may be stiff and out of mode with the rest of the world, but is noble. Not just literally, but also in his character. He's someone you can actually admire. There's no one anywhere like this. There's no one anywhere like that in this novel, and there isn't going to be. And that was hard for Trollope's audience to swallow. They wanted somebody to root for, and there's hardly anybody to root for in here. The person who gets a bulk of the space, the two characters who get the most space in this book, are the two worst characters in this book. Sir Felix, Lady Carberry's son, and Mr. Melmotte, who's a brute, who beats his wife, beats his daughter, is brutal and horrible to other people. How does Trollope refer to him? A surfeited sponge of speculation, a crammed commercial cormorant. So Trollope doesn't like him, and you don't like him either in the course of this book. But that's where we're going to leave it for now. We're moving on. I wonder if I have a chapter list here. We're moving on in for next weekend. Oh, I do. Let's see here. We're going to start. So next weekend you want to read, you want to start at chapter 26, which is called Mrs. Hurdle. Another problem for Paul Montague is Mrs. Hurdle, because Paul Montague is not, his hands are not clean. He's close as we come to an upstanding, noble character, but he's not upstanding and noble. He's just better than any of the wretched competition that he has. So we're starting with chapter 26 next week. And I will see you then. We'll postpone and we'll resume the way we live now next weekend. Thank you, BookTube.